Cecil, and today I'm going to be your guide through Canal Country. So this summer I decided I wanted to go somewhere I'd never been before, the Netherlands and Denmark. I've never been to Northern Europe as a whole before, and in this case, a lot of these countries seemed really geographically and societally similar. Gorgeous canals, low-lying areas, and for that reason, these two countries have to do a lot of planning for the future as to how they're going to do water management and keep their cities afloat. Now, just like these two countries, I had to do a lot of planning in order to get into this trip. So I'm going to show you how I plan a solo trip. And in that process, we're going to answer 5 questions: the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. You might notice that's 6 questions, but the who's already been answered. It's just me. It's the clothes that I need to bring. You can pack pretty damn light. In my case, I had already booked tickets to go to the Nordic countries in November. So I had to get nice and warm. Mainly just a lot of changes of undergarments, 2 or 3 sweaters, and then 1/3 layered I would just keep on throughout. It was just a top coat that I wore on all flights so that I wouldn't have to spend all of that storage space just keeping my top coat nice and cozy. Fortunately enough, in a lot of these places that you can visit via plane, they do actually happen to have these fortification structures that you can use to shield yourself from the elements called buildings. Congratulations! Now that you have your flight tickets and the general dates that you're going to be traveling, it's a good time to hop onto maps.google.com. Not only is Maps a great place to look for directions and to look at reviews of various places, it's also a fantastic place for trip planning because you can go ahead and set pins on a number of destinations. Once you zoom in on a city, it's really easy to just go ahead and look at all the little pins that pop up and see if that's a place where you want to go. And if it is, that's when you go ahead and put the green want to go pin on it. Eventually your map is going to be covered in these tiny little pins for the city all over the place, and you can sort of just discover which ones you can go to, which ones you can't based on whether they're open or not, whether there is transit to that location, whatever suits your dates. If it's your first visit to a new city, just like it was in my case, you might be interested in the city cards because oftentimes the city card not only gets you access to all the attractions, but all the public transit options that can get you to those attractions. You can start to really just put them all together by creating little routes and choose which attractions you're going to go put. Guess another time to go. Guess I'm gonna die too young.
Så bliver man bare taget på mandag, det er der ikke noget, der vil.
They keep on telling me, guess I'm gonna die too young. Travel is the ultimate gateway to one-of-a-kind experiences and cultural immersion. Sorry, I'm... So like without giving you just like one word boring answer, that's the smart answer. It's so vague, it's so haughty, it's uptight, it's canned, it's stained. It's such a pre-programmed robot response that it just can't be my answer alone. So I'm gonna try and explain it in terms of something that I like to look at when I travel. And so, for example, let's talk about trains. Let's talk about public transit, baby. San Francisco does a more or less good job of being interesting on a per block basis. There are so many interesting, unique neighborhoods, and the attractions are interspersed throughout, so you can sort of walk in between and still enjoy yourself even if you're not really aiming to do anything. Getting around can be a little cumbersome with the difficulty of finding parking and the time irregularity of like the transit system and all that. But if you look at my map on Google Maps of all the places I've been in San Francisco, like it does a relatively good job of keeping you occupied. At least that's what I thought before I went to Tokyo. just like how the rails go every which way in Tokyo, the city invites you in to explore every single nook and cranny. And so you want to go over here? Oh, where is over here? Oh yeah, that's kind of a good point. You can't really tell what over here is given all of the damn points on the map. And the fact that like such an unfamiliar place can bring you that much joy is what really fascinated me about Tokyo. And I wanted to find more places like that. And so now if you return back to the US, and especially when you're going back home to suburban and sprawling, when you think back to what other countries have, it's just insignificant and disgusting as a result. And that brings us to the question, how did we get here? Okay, so quick history refresher. In the 1940s, everyone got bombed except for us. Everyone else has good infrastructure now, and we don't. So hear me out. Getting bombed is good, actually. But historically speaking, World War II actually just represents the peak of a personal transportation-focused period of urban design. The days of the streetcar suburb where the public transit came right down to your door are totally over. All the rails have been ripped out of the ground and or paved over, and everyone's driving automobiles now. So we began to widen our roads and add parking on both sides and increase the distance of any point to any other manyfold. So more people bought cars to cover the distance. And to supplement that additional traffic, we permitted further expansions, further parking lots. We littered our towns with auto shops and pump stations to the point that it was only feasible to get anywhere via a car. And as this expansion induced yet more demand, we created a society best described by its greatest creation, the 28-lane Katy Freeway, which in all its width, even so, stands still, divides adjacent communities, and demands unending maintenance costs. Europe was only beginning to rebuild at the peak of our restructuring, stunting their car culture's growth. So by the time we directed a massive interstate highway system, Europe readopted its pedestrian-oriented, dense, walkable city layouts of old. So in fact, we were the ones who reconfigured as if we'd been bombed. Yet, it was all to please our corporate overlords. If you'd like to learn more about American urbanism, the highways it's drilled through downtowns, and the low-income neighborhoods it has displaced, you can do your required reading by looking up Robert Moses, who inflicted this pain and suffering on America today and is increasingly considered a manifestation of Satan on earth with every passing moment. So, why do I travel? Because I'm a fucking baby, that's why. I am the equivalent of an angry little child going, I want what he has. I want the toy. I now want to cry to my parents at the Department of the Interior and ask for the toys that every other country has. Travel inspires you with ideas and forces you to think about your or your representative country's approach to solving problems. And as far as I can tell, a primary reason that we go out to other countries and enjoy ourselves is because they temporarily increase our quality of life. Now that I've traveled to countries that have done better than us in some capacities, I feel like there's no reason we can't have the same things at home, and I want to fight for them now. Now, my fascination with urbanism doesn't really exalt this trip above any other. I still enjoyed a lot of food and tourist attractions and whatnot, but given I was going to the Low Countries, which have a lot of focus on this specific topic, I figured that that might be an exciting way to document how much more interesting they are.
Once again, please remain seated until the captain has turned off.
So, I arrived in Copenhagen, checked in at my apartment, and went sightseeing for the evening. It was election season, so as you walked along the segregated pedestrian and cycle paths, you'd see profiles of the candidates for each of Denmark's 14 political parties. Walking from Frederiksberg east, I walked past a number of parks, monuments, a game of cycle ball, which is soccer on bikes basically, and caught a glimpse of the zoo through the fence. I popped through a little shopping mall just by railway, and then I cut across some canals and river crossings. As I was getting cold and ready to head home, I saw some bright orange lights crossing a bridge in the distance. As I drew closer to the calming drawl of Let It Be, I discovered this mob acted not in protest, but in some form of solidarity. I continued past some gorgeous churches and landed myself in Christiana, the former military outpost turned open drug market. The next day was focused on visiting every attraction as quickly as possible. After I woke up, I hopped on the subway, activated my 24-hour Copenhagen card at 9:06 a.m., and came out minutes later in the canals in New Haven. Tracing the coastline eastward to Amalienburg, I watched the palace guards march in lockstep and indulged in the hymns of a Russian Orthodox church before studying designers' considerations on public spaces, retrofuturistic vehicles, and chairs, of which you might find great numbers in the grand halls of the King's Palace Christiansburg, which was on numerous independent occasions described as ugly by its visitors. On top of that, I saw live outdoor music in the fortress known as the Citadel, or Castellet. Don't make time to see the mermaid statue. Views of the city from the Round Tower, a Fiske Frikadeller at the indoor market, and to finish it all off, the well-decorated Tivoli Gardens, an amusement park outfitted with haunted houses, scarecrows, and pumpkins. And on the way back home, the children trick-or-treated not only at their neighbors, but at the convenience stores and fashion outlets of the shopping districts. Now, on Monday, almost every single public space in Copenhagen seems to close. That is, with exception of the zoo. So, remember how I scanned in my Copenhagen card at 9:06 a.m.? Well, I trudged to the metro station bright and early, crossing a particularly foggy Frederiksberg Palace, with the express purpose of scanning in at the zoo at a bright and crisp 9:04 a.m. the next day. After enjoying my fair share of polar bears, pandas, and giraffes, I bought a train ticket to Sweden for $8. I'm sure no one's ever said that before. And that no one has ever programmed a day like that before. But the nature just across the pond was impeccable, and I took advantage of it to sharpen my photography skills. By this point, I was getting comfortable modifying the aperture and the shutter speed on my camera, and the main barrier to a great shot became holding the damn thing steady for so long underneath a dim light barely piercing the clouds. Malmö mirrors Copenhagen in many ways, and namely via its division between a historic center island and the surrounding living quarters, where you'll find a gorgeous skyscraper called the Turning Torso. It's also a great place to try lingonberry jam and buy a lot of Swedish chocolate on the quick. Another slightly less exciting day trip than crossing the national border via an underwater railway is a Danish village that lies mostly dormant outside of the yearly Roskilde music festival. And boy, was it dormant. On one of the grayest days of the year, I wandered past deciduous forests, gorgeous gardens, and Viking workshops. Now, as we transition to the Dutch part of the trip, you'll notice, or rather not notice at all, much of a visual difference between the two regions. Whether it's gezellig or hygge, both of the cultures have untranslatable words relating to comfort and satisfactoriness that I was able to experience during choice moments throughout the trip. Both cultures still value a dense, walkable, bikeable urban core. Both dedicate themselves to diverse political discussion, mostly centered around progressivism. Windmills! They're both basically so underwater that they need canals, and any old molehill is worshipped as a mountain. They both somehow headline glorified slices of ham on top of dark bread as their national dish. So, where you might be looking at Legos, Vikings, and smørrebrød in Denmark, if you're looking to put a uniquely Dutch spin on a trip, absolutely make your way to a hockey field. Yes, a hockey field, because they play it on grass, just like soccer. Soccer is kind of plebeian compared to hockey here. But doesn't all the water just freeze up anyway and form a hockey rink anyway during the winter? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, it does. But rain or shine, the girls will play on regulation fields throughout the country every weekend without fail. And yes, this is primarily a women's sport, actually, where even the lower division players often receive scholarships to coach teams abroad. In addition, Old St. Nick comes 20 days early, and he doesn't ask for your cookies because he's trying to balance his diet before he gets to the US. Couple that with a mandatory diss track that you have to write about your friends and family, and you have a sweet, sour, and salty Christmas. Speaking of which, the national cuisine mainly features pickled options. So mashed potatoes with pickled cabbage integrated inside tends to feature next to meatballs as a winter dish, and lightly salted herring with onions might be your appetizer as you walk around through the city. Now, with Amsterdam, it's really hard to run out of options for things to do, but here's how you can spend a day. Just like at any self-respecting capital, the Rijksmuseum is a great way to see the state's wealth and extravagance through their most prized possessions, including one of the most detailed model ships in the world. It's not a must-see though, especially if you prize cute kittens more than history, because for a few dollars you can enjoy similarly skillful cat-infused art at the Kattenkabinet. Wandering about the canals, I wondered, and wondering about the canals, I wandered into the Canal Museum, which provided me with the background to understand how the flower-adorned ship-moored channels contributed to the city's expansion, aided its fortifications, and influenced its surrounding architecture and infrastructure. Then, not far away, I went to an open house of the Hendrika Maria, where I learned that living in those very canals costs about as much as an apartment would, ignoring annual mooring fees, nets about half the space, and requires you to watch your head. If you can afford one, though, you may be interested in the tulip market, though, which once rose and fell like the NFT market of yesteryear. The prettiest tulips would once have gone for more than the average merchant's salary every year. Then I found out from repeated sampling at multiple shops that, given the right goat cheese, I can actually, in fact, enjoy cheese. And my favorite is pink, and it tastes like the basil pesto you'd rub all over your sandwich. Finally, if you somehow have a couple of hours to spare to go watch a movie, you can go to the Film Museum, which usually does a showcase on an independent artist, but for me, given it was already late in the evening, I settled on a brief stroll through their history of cinematography before heading back to the central square. So by this point, it was getting time to head home. I had been in museums the entire day, and so I figured a second look around town in the dark might be the last thing I'd do in Amsterdam. And at this time of day, what place is more alive than the red light district? As I took a panoramic shot of all the people walking around and enjoying themselves, I discovered from the shout of, "What the fuck are you doing? No photos!" that I was not actually supposed to have my camera out. I just smiled back, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna walk out and call the police on me? Anyway, now that I'd somehow broken the law, I busted out of there, and of the port of Rotterdam, the engineering powerhouse of Delft, the de facto capital of The Hague, and the miniature Amsterdam in Leiden, none will necessarily lend you as an extreme experience, but all will suffice as an excursion into the Dutch mainland. If you happen to see a windmill in any of those locations, wander in and see if you can get a tour. While specialized factories produce the vast majority of spice in the Netherlands, these original mills grind yet still, thanks to ancestral knowledge and volunteer dedication. Otherwise, Antwerp is an easy day trip from Holland, and for its size, I'd say it's satisfactory to leave it at that. One day will give you plenty of time to go and discover a cubic castle on the river and wander through all the shops. While you're there, you may want to try an In-N-Out style animal fries with curry or beef as a topping, beef being the very authentic Belgian version. I'd highly recommend it. It's actually very delicious. On the other hand, Belgian waffles, optionally with a little butter or cream cheese or ice cream on top, will surprise you with a crunchiness and an airiness that's finer than a 5-mile-per-hour parking lot collision in a 2022 sedan. If you're conditioned to enjoy juicy, thick pancakes and waffles, you'll find the taste similar. I mean, it's a waffle, of course you would. But the texture totally novel. And speaking of pancakes, it's time for me to relax and enjoy a few now. Because after touring 4 countries in 10 days and showcasing 553 photos of that process, the last thing you do after a trip is come home and recover. In the shotgun seat with a shotgun mic. Scattering MCs like a shotgun might. Swerving up G's like a Top Gun flight. Messaging, leaving me on red, no right.